Dr. Mark Jangizi here with your Science Moment. Today I'm going to try to give a little bit of sense of proportion, but rather than proportion where we're talking about, the real risks of the disease or, the benefits of the interventions, or sort of empirical proportion, I want to sort of give you some moral proportion about other kinds of civil rights violations and the way that they're handled. So let me ask you, how is it that women in Iran, for example, who are, or whether they're out or within, and they're arguing against mandatory headscarves? One of the ways that they would never argue against mandatory headscarves is to say, okay, we've done a really careful study, and it's a randomized controlled study of women with hijab and women without hijab, and we've tested the degree to which the libido of men around society is messed up by one versus the other, and how well societal cohesion works when women are with hijab or without hijab, and so forth. And we've done the studies, and we were able to show that, in fact, society is better off with women without hijabs, or at least statistically significantly no different, or blah, blah, blah. And they bring forth these studies. No one does that. And that would be ridiculous to do that. The argument behind why hijabs shouldn't be mandatory is because nobody has the right to tell a person what to wear on their heads, right? That's the argument. And it would be absurd to go around with these kinds of empirical studies. Same thing, if you're going to argue against, let's say, the Khmer Rouge, Pol Pot, and the communists in Cambodia, and Pol Pot comes in and he gets his goons to go completely empty the cities. Completely empty. The entire populace, pushes them out into the villages and forces them to go to the villages. And you could say at the time, okay, like Pol or Mr. Pot, here's the reasons we shouldn't do this, because actually we've done a lot of studies when you forcibly villagize an entire city population, here's all the down things, and here's the upside. We've done the cost-benefit analysis, and when you actually take it, more empirically seriously, then, it turns out that it's no better, or in fact, it's actually worse, or in fact, it's a lot worse. No, you don't even bother with any of that. That's completely missing the point. Mr. Pot, you have no right, none of you have the right to tell us where to live, tell us where to move, and to engage in these kinds of acts against crimes against humanity, as it was and as it would be when those things are done. So why is it that most of the folks on my side, and I'm not saying that nobody should do any of this, but I just want to try to get this out there and get it in your head a bit. Why is it that 99% of the arguments that come from folks on Team Rationality pushing against these civil rights violations are in fact arguing the science? They're empirically saying, here are the cost-benefit analyses to your interventions. Your interventions, in fact, don't work as well as you think, or they have these certain kinds of harms and so forth. That's just to engage in the kind of silly ad absurdum stuff that I talked about for, arguing against mandatory hijabs, or arguing against Pol Pot, villagizing whole populations. The point, and the real point, is none of that empirical stuff. The point is that our leaders do not have the right to do these kinds of draconian interventions. It is not within their rights to do so, and it should never have been thought to have been so in the first place. When you start playing the game of, okay, here's actually the cost benefit, here's actually the randomized controlled trials, you're implicitly assenting to, in some sense, that if the RCTs ended up on their side, if it turned out that really these interventions were working, these mandates were working, look, okay, once we get everybody totally locked down and they're masked up and they're sealed, and you've got some, someone tomorrow could come up with some crazy ingenious scheme, and it turns out to work, super draconian, but it turns out actually to slow things down rather than pouring fire like all of these other stuff is. And if it actually worked, well, then where's your argument then? You might as well stick to the argument that you would have in that circumstance. And that argument concerns civil liberties, free expression, which has been violated, informed consent, all of the kinds of fundamental deontological, we call them, constraints on what people can do to other people for any reason. And that was your Science Moment.